Number 12. M3 Trench Knife. Black water closes over your face before you even know where you landed. The parachute is still pulling. Silk drags you through a flooded Norman field that is really a river, while 85 pounds of gear pins you down like an anchor. Somewhere above, tracers cut the dark. Somewhere behind, the C-47 is already gone. Your rifle is there. Your bayonet is there. Neither matters now. What matters is the 9-ounce blade tied close to the body, the M3 trench knife. Lieutenant Colonel Gerhard Boland reached for one in the Mortar flood zone on D-Day and started sawing at the harness before the water finished the job. That tiny knife was not romance, not commando swagger, not a prop for posters. It was the difference between drowning alone in the dark and clawing back to shore. The weapons that saved men most directly were often the ones armies later tried to ban, hide, or forget. A few minutes earlier, on the night of June 5th to 6th, 1944, Boland is still inside the C-47 with the 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment of the 82nd Airborne. Engine noise fills the fuselage so completely that every other sound feels trapped inside his own head. Men smoke because there is still time to smoke. Men sing quietly because singing is easier than thinking. Hands move over buckles, straps, snaps, steel. One last check, then another. In the red-lit cabin, every man looks bulkier than he is because every man is carrying a small mountain. About 85 pounds, Boland would remember later. Rifle, ammunition, grenades, canteen, rations, extra kit. Then the little things that become enormous when the jump light changes. A bayonet, a trench knife, often a switchblade too. M3 sits close and low where a man can find it by touch. 11.7 inches overall. 6.7 inches of blade. Beside a slung rifle, it looks small. In a dark aircraft full of men about to step into France, size is not the point. Reach matters. Speed matters. When everything else is hanging, snagged, jammed, or lost in the dark, this is still on you. Boland checks the rifle sling again. His regiment is not breaking rifles down into Griswold bags for this jump. The weapons are slung assembled. That saves time on the ground. It adds bulk in the door and weight under the chute. It gives the jump more to catch, more to drag, more to pull a man wrong if he lands wrong. Tonight, almost everyone will land wrong. The light is still red. Cigarettes burn down to short orange beads. Nobody says what happens if you come down in a tree, on a roof, in a ditch, or in water. Nobody needs to. They all know. The invasion has already turned into weather and metal and timing, and the timing is slipping. The formation has crossed into flak. The aircraft jolts. Men sway together because there is nowhere else to go. Then the red light dies. The green light comes on. The line starts moving. Now you are in the door. Wind tears everything flat. The slipstream crushes breath out of the chest. 1 second there is aluminum around you and red light on faces. The next, there is only black. No horizon. No field. No road. No way to judge distance. The drop into Normandy is supposed to end on land, but the Mortar flood zone does not care what the plan said. German flooding has turned the low ground into a sheet of dark water that looks, from above, like ordinary country. Boland hits not earth, but floodwater. Cold all at once, then mud, then motion. The parachute does not collapse neatly behind him. It catches and pulls. Silk fills, drags, jerks. He goes face down. Water floods over his helmet and into his nose and mouth. The 85-pound load that made him heavy in the airplane now makes him sink like equipment thrown from a bridge. The rifle is dead weight. The ammunition is dead weight. Every buckle and strap is suddenly an enemy hand. He tries to plant his feet and cannot. He tries to lift his head, and the canopy yanks him forward again. The flooded field is shallow in one place and deep in the next. That is worse than a clean river. There is no rhythm to it. One instant he is scraping bottom, the next his face is under again. He cannot stand up because the chute is still alive above him, so his hand goes where it was meant to go. Not to the rifle, not to the bayonet, to the knife strapped close to the body. Many paratroopers improvised that boot knife setup. Web straps cut down from a musette bag, the lower end tied off to the boot with a leather lace so the sheath would not slap loose in the jump. Official or not, neat or not, it worked. In Blackwater, worked is the only category left. Bolin gets hold of the M3 and starts cutting at the harness. This is not a clean movie slash. He is in the dark, half-submerged, being dragged, fighting fabric under tension. The blade is only 6.7 inches long. Length does not matter here. Control matters. Being able to grab it with numb hands matters. Being able to work close against webbing while the parachute keeps pulling matters. M3 was a fighting knife first, heavier and longer than the little switchblades many paratroopers also carried for lines. In this water, it stops being a category and becomes a tool. One blade, one strap, one more breath. He cuts. The harness resists. He goes under again. Mud grinds into his uniform. The rifle bangs against him. He cuts again. Nearby, other men are coming down into the same flooded dark. Some are shouting. Some are already too far away to hear clearly. Overhead, the invasion keeps moving as if none of this matters. Aircraft pass. Tracers stitch the night. Down here, the war has narrowed to inches of steel, and the pressure building in a man's chest. Bolin manages to roll onto his back. His face comes free of the water long enough to pull in air. The parachute is still dragging, but now he has one more second, then another. He works the knife at the harness again, sawing where he can reach, cutting whatever is still tying him to the silk. The load shifts. The pull changes. The canopy loses him. Suddenly he is not being towed anymore. The knife disappears back into the chaos of gear. His hands go to the next job, staying alive long enough to reach shore. He fights through the floodwater towards solid ground, not elegantly, not heroically, just inch by inch under the weight of everything he brought to war. The shore, when he gets there, is not safety. It is mud and darkness and separation. He has landed alone, like so many did. But alone on land is still land. Alone on land means he can stand up, gather himself, find other men, and begin the mission. That is what the M3 was on D-Day. In the aircraft, it was another item on the body. Dark, after the jump went wrong. It was the one piece of steel small enough to stay with you and sharp enough to buy back the next 10 seconds. It was issued especially to men carrying weapons like carbines and Thompsons that did not take bayonets, and by June 1944, the Army had already put millions into circulation since the knife entered service in March 1943. But the numbers are not the image that lasts. It is Bolin in floodwater, face down, cutting at his harness because the parachute is trying to drown him. The knife was 9 ounces. Number 11. M1911A1 pistol. On May 16, 1944, in England, Private Donald R. Burgett sat down and wrote a letter home. He was 19 years old. A Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division. In less than 3 weeks, he would be one of 6,928 men sent into Normandy under Mission Albany. He was officially a rifleman. That matters because riflemen were not usually the men the tables said should be carrying pistols. Officers, NCOs, machine gunners, radio operators, yes. A private with a full-length shoulder weapon? Usually no. But Burgett had been told something simpler than regulation. If you hit the ground separated from your main weapon, a sidearm might be the only thing between you and dying in a field you had never seen before. So he asked his father for one. His father was a Detroit police officer. He found an old Colt from the First World War, a .45 automatic, nickel-plated, already old enough to have a previous war in its steel. Mailing a handgun to an airborne private in England was not exactly standard supply procedure, so he hid it under a date nut cake and sent it across the Atlantic. Somewhere inside the vast machinery of Allied logistics, Liberty ships, depots, sensors, barracks, invasion planning, a cake moved through the system with a private sidearm inside it. The Army had not issued it. The Army had not quite approved it. Burgett opened the package and found a pistol where dessert was supposed to be. That small act of family smuggling tells you what the M1911 looked like on D-Day in real life. Not the clean museum version. Not the tidy label card. Airborne did carry M1911A1 pistols by the hundreds and thousands, because by the end of the war, the United States would procure 1,878,742 of them. But on June 6th, the reality was messier than the designation. Some men had the later M1911A1, with its shorter trigger and arched mainspring housing. Some had older M1911s pulled from inventory, overhauled, and reissued. Burgett had one that came by mail under a cake, so when we say M1911A1 pistol in the hedgerows of Normandy, we really mean the American .45 automatic in all the untidy forms war allows. For a paratrooper, the pistol solved a different problem than it did for almost anyone else. An infantry rifle is more powerful. A carbine is handier. A submachine gun puts more bullets in the air. Everybody knew that. But none of those advantages mattered if the weapon was in a drop bag below you, torn loose in the jump, or hanging somewhere you could not reach in the first blind seconds after landing. The pistol was not the best weapon in a firefight. It was the weapon still on your body when the firefight arrived, before your equipment did. Burgett wanted one badly enough to involve his father, the postal system, and a cake. In the early hours of June 6, 1944, he came down into Normandy before dawn. Scattered men, dark hedgerows, wet fields. The usual map had already ceased to exist. You jump with a plan, but the ground edits it. Burgett hit France carrying that hidden Colt. The first thing he did after landing was cock it. Not his rifle, not some heroic charge with the weapon he was supposed to have in his hands. The first motion was a thumb on a pistol hammer. In that moment, continuity mattered more than firepower. Numbers on the gun are plain, almost modest. 7 rounds in the magazine. A basic load of 21 rounds, meaning 3 7-round magazines. About 2.4 pounds empty, around 3 pounds loaded. A .45 ACP bullet leaving the muzzle at roughly 830 feet per second. Nothing exotic. No huge magazine, no rifle range, no mechanical trick. But airborne combat begins in pieces. One man in one field, one ditch, one orchard, trying to reconnect himself to an army. There, 3 pounds on the belt can matter more than a much better weapon somewhere else. Burgett's pistol did not replace his main weapon. It sat under the bigger story and helped make the bigger story possible. Through hedgerows, scattered firefights, and the chaos of those first Normandy days, the Colt was not the gun he planned to win the war with. It was the gun he could keep on him when everything else went wrong. In a jump operation, that is insurance against the exact way airborne plans fail. The Army knew part of this already, even if the paperwork lagged behind the need. Field Manual 23-35 treated the pistol for what it was, a compact emergency weapon, quick into action, limited in range, valuable at close quarters. Dry language. In practice, it meant this. You are alone in a Norman pasture at 3 in the morning. You do not know where your unit is. You do not know who is moving in the next hedgerow. A sidearm buys you a few seconds of certainty. Draw. Cocked and ready. 7 rounds that are actually with you. So the pistol spread beyond the neat borders of authorization. Combat zones revise policy from below. That also touches the larger question running through this whole arsenal. Why were the weapons that worked best so often the ones they tried hardest to ban or bury? The M1911A1 was never buried in the same way as a trench shotgun or an improvised grenade. But the useful truth around it was often softened by organization. Officially, a rifleman did not need one. In reality, enough men believed otherwise that some found ways to get one anyway. The gap between those two facts is where real combat lives. Picture Burgett moving through Normandy with that old nickel-plated Colt under his hand. Not glamorous, not cinematic, just practical. The pistol catches a bit of dawn light under a hedgerow branch, mud on the boots, moisture on the web gear. Somewhere ahead, Germans. Somewhere behind, other paratroopers trying to become a coherent force out of a night drop that had scattered them across miles. His main weapon mattered more for sustained fighting, but the pistol stayed continuous from England to aircraft to parachute to field. It crossed every break in the chain. That is why this little .45 sits so quietly in the middle of the D-Day story. No dramatic bulk, no spectacular blast, no giant ammunition count. Just a slab-sided automatic designed before the First World War, still relevant in the most modern invasion the Americans had ever attempted, because one quality outweighed all the others. It stayed with the man. On D-Day, that was half the battle. Burgett remembered that pistol because he remembered what it meant to have something in hand the instant his boots touched France. Not officially elegant, not doctrinally perfect, but real. Real enough that his father mailed it hidden in cake. Real enough that the first thing Burgett did on the ground was cock it. Real enough that an old private weapon from one war could carry a paratrooper into the next. He later put it in the plainest possible terms. The first thing I did was cock that .45. Number 10. M1A1 Carbine. In the dark before dawn on June 6, 1944, Private Bradford Freeman of E Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, came down into Normandy with a folding stock M1A1 carbine. That image is famous now. The compact airborne gun, wire stock, short barrel. It looks made for paratroopers because, in one very specific sense, it was. But the myth built around it is bigger than the gun ever was. The myth says this was the main rifle of the American paratrooper on D-Day. The evidence says something narrower and more interesting. The M1A1 was not primarily a superior battlefield rifle. It was a solution to a parachute problem. Start with size. A standard M1A1 carbine measured 35.63 inches with the stock extended. Fold it, and the length dropped to 25.51. Weight with sling and a loaded 15-round magazine, 6.79 pounds. Not feather light. But under a parachute harness, in the door of a transport aircraft, that difference mattered. The first clue is not caliber or prestige. It is bulk. Now put yourself in the airplane. You are loaded with reserve chute, main chute, equipment, ammunition, first aid packet, knife, canteen, entrenching tool, and whatever else your job requires. Space is gone. Movement is ugly. Nothing on your body wants to cooperate with anything else. A long weapon is not just weight. It has leverage. It catches. It bangs. It shifts. Every awkward motion gets worse. The folding stock carbine enters the story there, not as a glamorous assault weapon, but as a compact answer. Machine gunner, assistant gunner, officer, or specialist could leave England with a usable semi-automatic firearm in a padded jump scabbard instead of dragging a full-sized rifle through the jump. That was the M1A1 at its best. It got a man to the ground, armed. The numbers keep pointing the same way. Standard magazine capacity was 15 rounds. A fully loaded magazine weighed 0.59 pounds. Cartridge 30 carbine. Roughly a 111-grain bullet at about 2,000 feet per second, with an effective range around 300 yards. Those are respectable figures. In context, they tell a specific story. 15 shots at hand, semi-automatic fire, more reach and practical accuracy than a pistol, less bulk than a full infantry rifle. It sits in the middle. That middle ground is the second clue. The ammunition load says even more. A D-Day airborne carbine load could mean 5 15-round magazines plus 2 50-round boxes for refills. That is 175 rounds total if fully carried. It sounds generous when you list it out. In the field, the question is different. What kind of fight is this weapon built to survive? A jump weapon has to come down with the man, stay manageable in the dark, and give him immediate firepower while units are scattered across fields, hedgerows, orchards, and flooded low ground. For that job, the M1A1 made sense. Later, in sustained infantry combat, the balance shifted. Bradford Freeman is the key witness because of what he did after landing. He moved through Normandy with the folding stock carbine. Later, he picked up an M1 Garand and preferred it. That small choice cuts through pages of collector nostalgia. Freeman had both in the same campaign, under the same conditions, with the same stakes. When the battle became less about surviving the jump and more about fighting through hedgerow country, he wanted the harder-hitting rifle. The picture sharpens. The folding stock reduced bulk from 35.63 inches to 25.51. At 6.79 pounds loaded, it was easier to carry in jump conditions than a full-length rifle. It could ride in a padded jump scabbard designed around the airborne problem. Men customized how they carried its ammunition, sometimes with unit-made rigger pouches that could hold 4 15-round carbine magazines, because airborne troops adjusted kit around practicality, not parade ground purity. Even the scabbard had a catch. It was meant to strap to belt and leg, but some paratroopers avoided securing the leg strap because a bad landing could turn that neat piece of design into an injury risk. People often skip that last detail because it spoils the clean story. The iconic airborne weapon came with airborne compromises. The elegant solution could become a hazard on impact. Before a shot was fired in Normandy, the M1A1 was already sitting in the gap between official design and what men actually trusted with their bones. Calling it the main rifle misses the point. The M1A1 was officially standardized in May 1942, with first deliveries beginning in October that year. About 71,000 were shipped in the first production run between October 1942 and October 1943. A second run followed from May to December 1944, fewer than 70,000 more. Those are substantial numbers. They made the weapon visible across airborne imagery, but visibility is not battlefield primacy. Carbine became iconic because it photographed the airborne idea perfectly. Compact, modern, specialized. D-Day was not won by silhouettes. It was won by what men wanted in their hands once the landing was over and the killing turned methodical. So what was the M1A1 really? Not a toy, not a mistake. A compromise tuned for a very narrow moment. The descent, the assembly, the first confused movements after landing. In darkness, under parachute silk, scattered miles from plan, that mattered. A weapon that stays with the man can still shape the first hour. On D-Day, the first hour often decided whether there would be a second. But the same qualities that made the M1A1 perfect in the door of a C-47 could make it feel second best in a hedgerow lane, where range, penetration, and hitting power suddenly mattered more than folded length. There is one more clue, quieter than the rest. For such a famous D-Day weapon, the exact factory identity of many surviving examples is strangely hard to pin down. Inland mixed M1A1 serials with standard M1 carbines, and there is no known complete M1A1 serial number roster. The gun is iconic, the paperwork is muddy. Even the artifact resists the clean version of the story. If you want the truth of the M1A1 carbine on D-Day, do not start with museums or movie posters. Start with Bradford Freeman in Normandy. He jumped with the folding stock carbine. He carried it after landing. Then, when the fighting settled into the hedges, he reached for a Garand. The myth says airborne troops had found the perfect rifle. Evidence says they had found something else. A compact machine for getting through the jump with 15 rounds ready, 175 if fully loaded, and a lot less weapon snagging on everything between England and the ground. Then the fields opened, the hedgerows closed in, and Freeman changed guns. Number 9. M1 Garand Rifle. Before dawn on June 6, 1944, the M1 Garand came into Normandy in pieces. Not in every case, and not in every stick, but often enough that the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force describes the same ugly sequence. The standard rifle broken down inside a padded Griswold bag, dropped with the paratrooper, then reassembled on the ground. Start with the numbers. The rifle weighed 9.5 pounds unloaded. It measured 43.6 inches overall, with a 24-inch barrel. It was chambered in .30-06 Springfield, gas-operated, semi-automatic, fed by an 8-round en-bloc clip. Those specs read cleanly on a page. In a Normandy field at 1 o'clock in the morning, they turn into steps. A man lands. He cuts free. He finds the bag. He opens it. He puts the rifle together. He seats the clip. He chambers the first round. Only then does the mechanism matter. Until then, his main weapon is something he is hauling. The load makes that worse. PBS puts the average D-Day paratrooper at about 70 pounds of equipment. Officers averaged about 90. Add a rifle that already weighs 9.5 pounds before ammunition, and the Garand stops sounding abstract. It is weight on a harness. It is length in a cramped C-47 door. It is bulk tangled with parachute lines. The rifle was powerful, but power came after procedure. The M1A1 carbine could leave the aircraft compact and ready. The Garand often reached the ground as parts that had to become a weapon under fire. Once assembled, the equation changes fast. The M1 fires a full-power .30-06 cartridge. One clip holds 8 rounds. The standard M1923 cartridge belt carried 10 pockets, 1 clip per pocket, for 80 rounds on the belt. One bandolier held 6 more clips, another 48 rounds. A paratrooper with a full belt and 1 bandolier had 128 rounds before counting anything stuffed into pockets, musette bags, or slung over the shoulders. Divide 128 by 8, and you get 16 loaded clips. At an aimed rate of 16 to 24 rounds per minute, the rifleman could keep deliberate fire going far longer than the little folding carbine ever promised. Officially, the listed maximum effective range was 500 yards. In hedgerow country, few shots stretch that far. The number still tells you what the weapon was built to do. This was a field rifle dropped into a night operation that made field conditions almost impossible. The action matters here. Gas-operated, semi-automatic, 1 pull, 1 shot, with propellant gas cycling the rifle and loading the next round. No manual bolt work between shots. No need to break cheek weld and run a handle. In 1944, that meant speed with full rifle power behind it. 8 rounds go fast because the rifle lets them go fast. On a dark landing zone, those seconds matter. A man sees movement and answers it, or he does not. Set that beside the airborne platoon structure of February 1944, the one used for Normandy. Airborne rifle squads did not lean on the BAR in the same way standard infantry units did. They relied on M1919A4 light machine guns. That shifts the Garand's role. In a regular infantry story, the rifleman can sound like support for the automatic rifle. In an airborne rifle platoon on D-Day, the Garand man is the steady base. The M1919A4 gives the squad sustained automatic fire, but it is heavier, crew-served, and harder to assemble in a scattered night drop. Garand is what one rifleman can make work by himself, if he can get it working at all. Now go to one man. First Lieutenant Richard Winters of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne. He landed near Sainte-Mère-Église after losing his weapon. That one detail cuts through the polished version of the jump. Men did not come down in neat formation with rifles ready and clean fields of fire. They came down scattered. Gear was missing. Plans were broken. Officers were left trying to turn fragments into units. Winters gathered stray paratroopers and moved towards Sainte-Marie-du-Mont. Later that day, with 13 men, he attacked the German battery at Brécourt Manor. The position was defended by roughly 50 Germans and mounted 105mm guns firing toward the Utah beach exits. Look at the numbers. 13 against about 50. 4 artillery pieces at 105mm. Here, the Garand stops being a set of specifications and becomes a fighting tool. 8 rounds at a time sounds modest, until you place the rifle in trenches and gun pits, in the hands of men who need immediate, aimed fire while closing on the position. In that kind of fight, the requirements are simple. The weapon has to hit hard. It has to reach through cover better than a pistol cartridge. It has to let a rifleman fire again without working a bolt. The Garand did that. It was heavy on the jump. In the assault, it paid back the weight. Another detail sits in plain sight. The exact proportion of Normandy paratroopers who jumped with the Garand disassembled versus those who carried it assembled for immediate use is still unclear. Museum and collector sources agree that both happened. Precise breakdown by regiment, company, or aircraft stick does not survive cleanly. That uncertainty says something about airborne combat on D-Day. The official method existed on paper. The practical method changed in aircraft doors, on airfields, and in the judgment of men who knew what the first minute after landing felt like. A 43.6-inch rifle is awkward in a jump. 8 rounds of .30-06 ready in hand are hard to give up. The D-Day Garand sits in that tension. The same split runs through the whole story. The best airborne weapon for getting to the ground was not always the best airborne weapon once you were there. Freeman changing from a folding stock carbine to a Garand makes sense when you run the numbers. 15 rounds of .30 carbine in a compact package answer one problem. 8 rounds of .30-06, a 24-inch barrel, and 500-yard reach answer another. One gets through the door. The other works in the hedgerow. Officially, the M1 Garand's airborne weakness was obvious. Too long. Too heavy. Too awkward. Often carried disassembled in a Griswold bag that left the paratrooper exposed at first contact. On the ground, in the fields and lanes where the drop turned into a battle, those same liabilities pointed to something else. Weight meant power. Length meant velocity. 8 rounds meant 8 fast, aimed shots without touching a bolt. The jump tried to tame the rifle. The fight kept bringing it back. In Normandy, the Garand was supposed to be a burden first and a weapon second. It kept proving the reverse. Number 8. M1A1 Thompson submachine gun. Imagine meeting your first American paratrooper in Normandy and finding him armed for sudden violent contact, but with almost no spare ammunition left by the time his boots hit the ground. Not because the gun failed, the jump took the rest. In a night drop scattered across hedgerows, orchards, and flooded fields, the gap between one loaded magazine and 10 could decide whether a weapon dominated the first encounter or went silent before the battle had even taken shape. Years later, Robert Murphy still remembered one detail with perfect clarity. Not just the jump, not the blackened face paint, not even the low run over Normandy. He remembered the pouch. The ammunition pouch he cut away by accident in the dark. On June 6, 1944, Murphy was a pathfinder with the 82nd Airborne. He stood in the door of a C-47 with a Thompson submachine gun in his hands. The aircraft came in at about 300 feet. He jumped third. He carried more than a firearm. He had 300 rounds for the Thompson, a knife, a switchblade, and a 40-pound radar set meant to guide in the waves behind him. He landed at about 1:10 a.m., rolled on impact, reached to cut himself free from the parachute harness, and sliced away the pouch holding most of his ammunition. That one mistake says more about the Thompson on D-Day than almost any specification sheet. The M1A1 Thompson looked like exactly what an airborne soldier should want. It was compact, at 813 millimeters overall. Heavy, yes, at 4.78 kilograms, but that weight helped control recoil. It fired the .45 ACP, an 11.43 by 23 millimeter pistol cartridge with hard, close-range impact. It used 20 or 30 round box magazines. This was not the drum magazine Thompson from gangster films and prohibition posters. In Normandy, the version most often seen with U.S. airborne troops was the M1A1, a simplified wartime gun built for practicality. In the aircraft door, that practicality looked one way. On the ground, it could look very different. The Thompson was immediate. That was its strength. No long barrel to fight through a doorway. No need to assemble it after landing. In a scattered night drop, men could hit the earth alone, half-drowned, upside down in an orchard, or staring at a hedgerow they did not recognize. In those seconds, immediate mattered. If contact came at 10 yards in the dark, a Thompson already in hand answered faster than a rifle tied to your leg or packed in canvas. For that kind of D-Day problem, it came close to perfect. Then the cost appeared. The Thompson fired at about 700 rounds per minute. Murphy's 300-round load sounds generous until the arithmetic catches up with it. Hold the trigger down and the full supply is gone in roughly 26 seconds. Nobody planned to fire it that way. The Thompson's real job was short bursts, 2 or 3 seconds of hard, close-range fire in the confusion after landing. but those bursts had to come from somewhere. On the M1A1, that meant a stack of heavy stick magazines crammed into pouches, musette bags, or whatever arrangement a man trusted enough to jump with. And that trust could fail in one cut. Murphy still had one loaded magazine in the gun. The rest may have vanished into a Norman field before he had even oriented himself. In an instant, the weapon that looked ideal for an isolated pathfinder turned into a countdown. Every burst had a price. Every shadow had to be judged. Every contact had to be worth part of a magazine that might never be replaced before daylight. That is what the Thompson's legend tends to cover up. Popular memory gives it swagger. In airborne use, it looks colder than that. Not glamour. Compression. A compact answer to a compact crisis. The men carrying it were not clearing city alleys with endless drums. They were dropping at night with 20 and 30-round boxes, extra gear, cut straps, lost bundles, and the real possibility that not all the ammunition they had at the aircraft door would survive the landing with them. Some earlier M1928A1 Thompsons were in Normandy, yes, but the M1A1 is the model that keeps appearing with airborne troops for a reason. It was simpler, better suited to wartime production, better suited to rough handling. In the first minute after landing, that simplicity counted. The weapon was ready immediately, not 5 minutes later, not after assembly. Not after finding an equipment bag. That same readiness carried a trap. The Thompson gave you a brutally effective first answer, and it pushed you towards spending ammunition at the exact moment resupply was least likely and separation from your unit was most likely. That tension sits at the center of the airborne problem. The best weapon for surviving the landing was often not the best weapon for surviving the next 6 hours. The Thompson makes that point harshly. Commanders do not only fear whether a weapon works, they fear how fast it works, how fast it is spent, and what kind of fighting it invites. The numbers keep pulling everything back into focus. 0.78 kilograms in the hands. 45 caliber rounds in 20 or 30 round magazines on the body. A cyclic rate near 700 per minute. A Pathfinder carrying 300 rounds and a 40-pound radar set on a jump from 300 feet into darkness. Those figures do not sit neatly apart. They crash into each other. They describe a man landing with a weapon built for sudden violence and a load so awkward that one knife cut can turn abundance into near scarcity. We still do not know whether Murphy's 300-round load was typical. Sources give his number clearly, but they do not say whether most Thompson-armed paratroopers jumped with the same amount, less or more, or whether a Pathfinder expecting to operate alone simply carried extra because he had to. The exact standard stays blurred. The scene does not. A Thompson made sense in the air. A Thompson made sense in the first seconds on the ground. Then the dark field took most of its promise away. Normandy, 1:10 in the morning. A field he did not choose. A Thompson in his hands. One magazine seated, the rest lying somewhere behind him in wet grass, silent in a lost canvas pouch. Number 7. M3 submachine gun. On June 4, 1944, at Exeter Airfield in southwest England, one photograph caught something it was not really supposed to catch. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Lee Wolverton is there for a rehearsal before the invasion. Beside him stands First Lieutenant Alex Bobuck. In Bobuck's hands is not the familiar slab-sided Thompson that had already become part of the airborne image. It is the new M3 submachine gun. A .45 caliber weapon fed from a 30-round box magazine, firing at about 450 rounds per minute, weighing 8 pounds empty, roughly 4 pounds lighter than the Thompson it was meant to replace. 4 pounds does not sound like much in a barracks room. In a parachute harness, it does. Add hedges, ditches, fences, a reserve chute, ammunition, an entrenching tool, grenades, water, and darkness, and 4 pounds stops being a nuisance. It becomes a choice. The photograph shows more than a lighter gun. It fixes a moment in time. 2 nights before D-Day, before the jump, before the scattering, before 6,928 men of the 101st Airborne dropped on Mission Albany, and 6,420 more of the 82nd Airborne came down on Mission Boston. This new weapon was already in the frame. Not everywhere, not in standard issue numbers, just there, quietly, early. When people picture American paratroopers in Normandy, they picture Thompsons, M1 carbines, Garands. They picture the weapons that looked heroic in newsreels and photographs. The M3 did not look heroic. It looked stamped, welded, simplified. The nickname came fast, the grease gun. Not a glamorous name. Factories were not building glamour. They were counting hours, tools, and machine cuts. Thompson worked, but it was expensive in the most wartime sense of the word. It consumed machining capacity. The M3 existed because the United States wanted a .45 caliber submachine gun that could be turned out faster, with more stamped metal and less patient milling, by industrial plants better at volume than elegance. One of them was General Motors' guide lamp division. The M3 was born from pressure. Normandy punished anything heavy, awkward, or hungry. The jump broke units apart. It dropped men into flooded fields, orchards, lanes, and hedgerows, often far from the men they had trained beside. A perfect parade ground weapon meant very little there. What mattered was what you could carry, land with, control in the dark, and keep firing when the fight collapsed to 20 yards through brush. The M3 fit that world better than its appearance suggested. Same .45 punch, same 30-round magazine capacity as late-war Thompson magazines. But it fired at a slower cyclic rate, around 450 rounds per minute. It did not tear through ammunition in the same frantic blur. With a Thompson, a nervous trigger finger could dump a magazine into the dark very quickly. With an M3, short bursts were easier to keep short. In hedgerow fighting, that was not a technical footnote. It decided who still had rounds left. Go back to the record. June 6, 1944. Sainte-Mère-Église. One surviving photograph shows an 82nd Airborne paratrooper with an M3 in town on D-Day itself. Another image from Normandy shows Captain Bob Piper of G Company, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, standing with a guide lamp M3 in front of a wrecked Horsa glider. He is there with the gun in plain view next to smashed wood and torn fabric. These are not rumors, they are visual receipts. The replacement had arrived before the old gun had left. The evidence needs a warning label. Limited numbers, transitional issue, present but not dominant. If you overstate the M3's role on D-Day, the photographs stop helping and start misleading. This was not yet the weapon of every American paratrooper. It was something more interesting. A future weapon, already leaking into the present. That is what makes the document useful. A single photo of Bobuck at Exeter could be dismissed as a rehearsal oddity. A single photo in Sainte-Mère-Église could be waved off as an isolated case. But the images stack up. Rehearsal in England on June 4th. Combat zone evidence in Normandy on June 6th. Another airborne officer with a guide lamp gun near a wrecked glider. At that point, the pattern is hard to ignore. The M3 was there. Rare, but real. The details matter. Normandy examples on D-Day should be treated as M3s, not M3A1s. That later variant did not arrive until December 1944. It is a small distinction, but these stories get sloppy fast when later versions get pushed backward into famous battles. On June 6th, the men carrying this stamped .45 were carrying the earlier model. On the ground, that meant a shorter, lighter automatic weapon that made more sense once the drop had gone wrong, which, for many men, it had. You land alone. You are carrying less weight than the man with the Thompson. Your gun fires the same cartridge, but slower and steadier. In a hedgerow lane or around a farmhouse wall, that lower rate of fire is not less violence. It is violence stretched into something you can aim. The M3 gave up prestige and gained practicality. One part of the record stays blurry. We know the magazine held 30 rounds. We know the caliber. We know the gun's weight and its approximate rate of fire. What the surviving sources do not give us is the exact standard D-Day ammunition load for each M3 armed paratrooper. That likely varied by role, by unit, by what was available, and by how early these guns had filtered in. The gun is visible. Its full logistical footprint is not. The photograph shows the weapon. It does not show how long the man could feed it. That gap is frustrating, but it also shows how weapons really enter war. Not cleanly, not all at once. A new design does not arrive with a trumpet and a universal issue card. It appears at the edges first, in a rehearsal photo, in a street after the drop, in the hands of one captain standing beside a shattered glider. You see it before you can fully measure it. Once you see it, the logic is plain. The airborne problem had not changed. Men were still scattered. Loads were still punishing. Close-range fights still erupted suddenly, often before dawn, often against enemies only a hedgerow away. A lighter submachine gun with the same .45 caliber and a more controllable 450 round per minute pace was not a downgrade from the paratroopers' point of view. It was industrial realism turned into tactical advantage. The weapons soldiers valued most often embarrassed the institutions above them. Too crude, too efficient, too honest about what combat actually required. The M3 looked like a shortcut, so it looked inferior. In Normandy, it was neither. It was the replacement. Arrived early. Number 6. Browning Automatic Rifle. Before dawn on June 6, 1944, you were in the dark near Amfreville. Nothing is where it was supposed to be. Company C of the 1st Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, has come down scattered across hedgerows and fields. Men are cut off in ditches, behind walls, in small patches of ground they did not choose. Somewhere ahead, German machine gun fire pins them flat. PFC Thomas Lloyd Rogers does not wait for the battle to sort itself out. He finds the pinned men. He sees what is holding them in place. Then, instead of waiting for a crew-served gun to be hauled up and set, he climbs onto a stone wall in full view of the enemy with a Browning automatic rifle. That choice tells you what the BAR was for. It answered a specific problem. One man needing immediate fire. No tripod, no full gun team, no long setup. Just 20 rounds of .30 caliber in a box magazine and a weapon built to throw automatic fire hard enough to break a position before that position breaks you. Rogers opens up in short bursts. He has to. A BAR magazine holds 20 rounds. Loaded, that magazine weighs 1 pound 7 ounces. Empty, 7 ounces. At the weapon's normal automatic rate, around 550 rounds per minute, the math turns vicious fast. Hold the trigger too long and the magazine is gone in seconds. The BAR was never about endless spraying. It hit in sharp cuts. Burst, stop, shift, change magazines, burst again. On that wall near Amfreville, it works. Rogers neutralizes the machine gun. Then he pushes forward. His fire kills or wounds 25 German soldiers. That is not abstract suppression. Americans who had been pinned can breathe again, move again, organize, and advance. Because one man stood up where everyone else had to stay down. Airborne troops had every reason to want a weapon like that. It compressed firepower. The official gun could lag behind the fight. The BAR moved at the speed of one determined man. By then, the BAR was the M1918A2 version. Air-cooled, gas-operated, magazine-fed, chambered in caliber .30. About 21 pounds without sling in the manual's configuration, with its bipod hanging from it like both promise and burden. It had 2 automatic settings, roughly 350 rounds per minute on slow and 550 on normal. No semi-automatic mode. That matters. The gun demanded discipline every second. You did not tap off tidy single shots. You managed recoil, burst length, and a magazine that always felt too small for the moment. So yes, it hit harder than a submachine gun. Yes, it gave one paratrooper the kind of immediate automatic fire that could rip open a hedgerow fight. It was also long, heavy, and hungry. 20 rounds is not much when the weapon exists to solve emergencies fast. Every burst burned down the clock. Rogers climbed the wall with it anyway. Then the story runs into paperwork. In the Normandy parachute rifle platoon, the squad automatic weapon was not supposed to center on the BAR. It centered on the heavier M1919A4 light machine gun. That was the official logic. Automatic fire in the platoon would come from a belt-fed gun team, not from a single rifleman with a BAR. Later in the war, around the lead-up to Operation Varsity in 1945, BAR authorization for parachute riflemen becomes easier to trace. D-Day in Normandy, for parachute infantry, the BAR sits in a gray zone. Rogers is right in the middle of that gray zone, with a smoking one in his hands. How did he have it? The action is clearer than the supply chain. His citation is real. The place is real. The date is real. Company C, 1st Battalion, 504th PIR, 82nd Airborne Division, near Amfreville, June 6, 1944. The effect is real too. 25 enemy killed or wounded, pinned troops able to organize and advance. The path the BAR took into his hands is harder to pin down. Maybe local improvisation, maybe unofficial pre-drop issue, maybe a battlefield pickup in the chaos after landing. The surviving record confirms the fight more clearly than the inventory. That is how useful weapons keep appearing in this story, not neatly, not by perfect chart. They show up where the official system is too slow, too rigid, or too proud to admit what the fight actually needs. That pattern runs through Normandy. The weapon that solves the immediate problem is not always the one the table of organization wanted in those exact hands. The BAR was awkward for airborne doctrine because it sat between categories. Not a rifle in the ordinary sense, not a true light machine gun in the crew-served sense either. It was a bridge weapon, too heavy to carry casually, too limited in capacity to dominate like a belt-fed gun. That made it nearly ideal for a paratrooper who landed scattered and had to create firepower out of himself. You can feel the appeal at once. You hit the ground alone, or half alone. The platoon is broken into chunks. The drop has smeared men across Norman farmland. You hear automatic fire beyond a hedgerow. No time to assemble the doctrinally perfect answer. The doctrinally perfect answer is still trying to find its crew. The BAR answer is already on the wall. It also changes the tempo. The mortar needed ammunition and spacing. The bazooka needed targets worth the tube. The M1919A4 needed a team. The BAR stripped automatic fire down to one body, 2 hands, and 20 rounds at a time. In an airborne battle, that could be the difference between staying pinned and breaking the pin before the enemy understood what happened. The same quality that made it effective made it institutionally awkward. It blurred lines. It encouraged improvisation. It put serious firepower into a form the paperwork had not fully blessed for Normandy parachute rifle squads. Useful weapons kept exposing the gap between organized plans and actual combat. The BAR exposed it brutally well. Rogers survived D-Day. 9 days later, on June 15, 1944, he was killed in action. What remains is a frozen image from before dawn near Amfreville. A man on a stone wall, a 21-pound automatic rifle, 20-round magazines disappearing one burst at a time. A weapon that officially did not quite belong there, proving exactly why someone brought it anyway. His citation says it in the plainest possible way. He mounted a stone wall in full view of the enemy, and with his BAR, neutralized the machine gun. Number 5. Mk2 Fragmentation Grenade. On June 5, 1944, the load plan is already in writing. Men boarding C-47s for the Cotentin are packed by the numbers. More than 13,000 American paratroopers lifted in roughly 925 aircraft, due to go out over Normandy between 016 and 0245. Mission Albany carries 6,928 men of the 101st in 443 planes. Mission Boston sends 6,420 more of the 82nd in 379. The paperwork is tidy. The night is not. You are standing in the fuselage before takeoff, knees bent under the weight. An airborne trooper on D-Day carries about 70 pounds, An officer, closer to 90. Reserve shoot on the chest, ammunition, rations, water, gas mask, entrenching tool. The jumpsuit is cut with oversized pockets for one reason. Whatever is on your body is what you will fight with after the drop. A hand checks a grenade the way it checks a buckle or a strap. The Mark II sits heavy in the palm, 4.5 inches long, 2.25 across at its widest point. 1.31 pounds of cast iron and explosive. The grooved body feels rough against wet fingers. Inside is less than an ounce of filler, only 0.74 ounces of EC powder in one standard wartime configuration. The casing is what makes it deadly. Pull the pin, release the spoon, and the M10A3 fuse begins burning through a delay of roughly 4 to 4.6 seconds. Long enough to throw, too long if you freeze. Then the light turns green. The planes cross the coast in darkness, fog, and flak. Formations break, pilots jink. Men go out into black air over a landscape they cannot read. Fields, marshes, flooded low ground, hedgerows, roads, orchards, church towers. Some land near their sticks, some land miles off. Some never find the bundles that carried extra radios, mortars, base plates, ammunition. But the grenade is still there in the pocket, banging against the thigh as they crawl, run, hide, and gather. Dawn comes gray over the Cotentin. By 0830, near Le Grand Chemin, Lieutenant Richard Winters of Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, has a problem in front of him and no time for anything elegant. German artillery from Brécourt Manor is firing toward Utah Beach. 4 105mm guns, laid out in a line and protected by trenches, hedgerows, and machine gun positions. The beach needs those guns silenced. The men on hand are whoever is actually here. Winters cuts them down to what they can carry and move with. Ammunition and grenades. Nothing extra. No dead weight. He has 9 riflemen to begin with, 2 M1919 light machine guns, and a single 60mm mortar missing its base plate. This is not a force built to take a battery. It is the force the field has produced. So they go low. A drainage ditch runs toward the position. Winters uses it as cover and moves his men along the flank. Field on one side, embankment on the other, German fire crossing from ahead. Dirt under the elbows, water in the bottom, hedge roots snagging web gear. Beyond the brush, artillery crews are still working the guns. Beyond them, Utah Beach is taking their shells. Now your face is almost level with the mud. Rounds clip leaves over your head. Every yard matters. A rifle can reach farther, but a grenade only asks for one clean throw. Its useful fragmentation radius is listed at 30 yards. Useful. That word matters. The same manual warns fragments can fly as far as 200. Close enough to kill the enemy, not so close that your own cast iron comes back through the hedgerow. Buck Compton's group edges forward until they are at grenade range. Not training ground range, real range. The kind measured by whether a man can rise just long enough to throw over a parapet and drop back before return fire saws the grass flat. Suppression starts first. The machine guns open. Riflemen fire into the trench line. Heads stay down. Then the grenades go. A spoon snaps free. A hand whips forward. Another follows. For 4 seconds, maybe 4.5, the trench seems to hold its breath. Then the first gun pit jumps in dirt, smoke, and cast fragments. Winters moves on the burst. He charges the first emplacement as the grenades break it open, because that is what the blast is for here. Not spectacle in open ground. A split second of shock. Men ducking. A crew broken apart. A trench lip suddenly possible to cross. The assault team goes in behind the fragments while the defenders are still trying to understand what hit them. One gun pit is not the battery. The battery is trench after trench, hedge after hedge, each connected to the next. The Americans do not stop in the first position, because stopping means being pinned inside it. The fight starts sliding sideways, from one 105 to the next, through communication trenches cut into Norman earth. Grenades first where the angles are tight, rifle fire where the trench straightens, Machine gun bursts from behind to keep German heads down across the field. Demolition men finishing what the grenade only opens. Now the range is counted in steps. 3 men around a bend, a throw into a recess, mud slapped onto sleeves. Smoke hanging low in the trench. You hear the fuse hissing in your head even when you cannot actually hear it, because after the pin comes out, every second feels physical. Too early and it rolls back. Too late and it goes off in the hand. The body learns a rhythm. Pull, grip, throw, drop. Pull, grip, throw, move. At the second gun, the pattern repeats, but more Germans are awake now. Fire comes harder from the flank. A machine gun reaches across the field and cuts the grass in lines. Men flatten against the trench wall. Another grenade goes over. Then another. The famous pineapple grooves are supposed to help the casing break up, but nobody watching it burst is admiring the design. What matters is that each fragment opens a little room, room to climb in, room to rush a crew, room to turn a prepared gun position into separate emergencies. By the third emplacement, more paratroopers have joined the attack. The tiny force that started in a ditch thickens as scattered men come in out of the hedgerows and feed themselves into the line. There is no clean reserve system. This is airborne combat on D-Day. The battle is still assembling itself while it is already underway. Winters keeps pushing. The trench is the road now. Men fire down it, throw into it, run through it bent double. A grenade lands short and clatters. Someone slams flat into the dirt. The blast punches the wall and rains soil into collars and mouths. Another throw clears the next bend. A 105 stands there, huge at close range, shield and trail filling the pit like machinery dropped into a ditch. And then that gun, too, is overrun. About 11:30, roughly 24 paratroopers under Winters, with 5 more under Ronald Spears entering the fight, have neutralized 4 105mm guns defended by around 50 Germans. But inside the trench, none of that is a finished number yet. It is still a chain of corners. One more turn, one more pit, one more throw. Ahead, beyond the next hedge gap, somebody yells that there is another machine gun. A hand is already reaching into the jump pocket. Then the field in front of them erupts. Number 4. Number 82, Gammon Grenade. The grenade that could save your life by trying to kill you first. On June 5, 1944, Private Harold Paul waited in England with A Company, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne, loaded for the jump into Normandy. His regiment was going in on Operation Boston, headed for Drop Zone O near Sainte-Mère-Église and the roads around La Fière. Men were packed into aircraft with rifles, ammunition, reserve chutes, leg bags, knives, rations, and the small devices meant to crack stronger defenses without adding too much weight. One of them was the number 82 Gammon Grenade. Officially, it was a grenade. In use, it was stranger than that. A 340-gram canvas and fuse shell that could be stuffed with almost anything, up to 900 grams of explosive if you wanted maximum force. It was not a standard fragmentation bomb. It was closer to a pocket demolition charge that fit in a jump pocket. Harold Paul saw the bargain before he ever reached France. Sometime around 10 or 11 that night at Spanhoe Airfield, in Headquarters Company, 1st Battalion, a carried gammon detonated before takeoff. In a crowded airborne unit, before the mission had even begun, that was about as bad as a grenade could fail. Private First Class Robert L. Leakey was killed. Private Pete Vaugh was killed. Corporal Kenneth A. Vaught was killed. Private Eddie O. Mielberg died later that night. 4 men were lost to a weapon still on the friendly side of the channel. No German fire, no hedgerow, no bunker. Just a device built around an impact fuse and a soft body that you loaded yourself. The gammon's appeal was the same thing that made it frightening. It used the number 247 always fuse, a name that sounds almost cheerful until you think about what it means. It was built to function regardless of the angle of impact. Throw it under a vehicle, against a wall, into a hard target, and it did not need the neat textbook strike an ordinary grenade might. It armed in flight and detonated on impact. For airborne troops, that was gold. They jumped with limited heavy weapons, and this gave them a charge that could serve as anti-personnel, anti-vehicle, or improvised demolition, depending on how they filled it. Some instructions even allowed stones as filler for anti-personnel effect. Instead of carrying separate tools, you carried one unnerving little system and trusted your hands not to make the last mistake. Harold Paul still climbed onto the plane. So did the rest of the 505th. Airborne operations did not pause for nerves. They flew, crossed the channel, and by about 1:51 in the morning on June 6th, the regiment began coming down over Normandy. The drop was chaotic, but not a disaster. Out of 118 sticks, about 75% landed near the rally point on DZO. By D-Day standards, that was remarkably tight. Men who expected to scatter across black fields and flooded lowlands were suddenly close enough to form small fighting groups fast. That mattered around Sainte-Mère-Église. It mattered on the causeways. For Harold Paul, it mattered most near La Fière Bridge, where close ground, hedgerows, ditches, and German positions could turn a short movement into a killing zone. Paul later recalled it in blunt, ground-level terms. His group was pinned down near the bridge. Not in some grand battle line. Men stuck in place while German fire held them there. In airborne combat, weapons stop being categories and become time. How many seconds can this gun buy you? How many yards can that charge open? How many men can get from one ditch to the next before someone walks the fire onto them? Here, the gammon became exactly what it had been built to be. Another paratrooper. Paul does not turn him into a legend, only the man holding the grenade at that moment. Threw a gammon at a German soldier. The blast killed him. The small group moved again toward the bridge. That was the whole exchange. No speech, no polished demonstration. A dangerous little bag of explosive left one airborne hand, landed where a rifle or an ordinary grenade might not solve the problem fast enough, and a blocked route opened. For Harold Paul, the gammon was not an abstract British invention introduced in May 1943. It was the difference between being pinned and advancing. Its usefulness came from design choices so unforgiving that, inside an aircraft, they feel almost insane. The gammon's body was soft because it was meant to be flexible. Fill it light for one job, heavy for another. Use it against men, vehicles, or cover. The fuse was impact-based because airborne troops often had no time for careful placement or delayed demolition drills under fire. There was even a shortened 4.5-inch safety tape cut down from the normal 11.5 inches for closer anti-tank work, because the ideal version of this weapon was always the more aggressive one. Get nearer, throw later, hit harder. In a field or lane in Normandy, that could be brutally effective. Tense assembly area, or a troop carrier full of loaded men, the same logic made it feel less like issued equipment and more like a live argument with gravity. You can see why paratroopers wanted it. A standard grenade gave you one answer. The gammon gave you options. On D-Day, options mattered more than polish. You might land far from your machine gun. You might lose your leg bag. You might be attacking a wall, a vehicle, a doorway, or a ditch line with whoever happened to be beside you. The weapons that survived that kind of war were often the ones that broke categories. The battlefield kept rewarding tools that were too crude, too ugly, or too dangerous to look respectable anywhere else. Harold Paul's memory holds both faces of the gammon in the same night. In England, before takeoff, it killed its own side. Near La Fière, it killed the man pinning his group down and let them move. Officially, the number 82 was a hand grenade, neatly designated Mark I, issued as part of Airborne kit. On the ground, it was less tidy. A do-it-yourself bomb, powerful because it ignored the usual limits, feared because it ignored them for everyone. That gap between the paperwork and the thing men actually carried never closed. Number 3. M1919A4 Browning machine gun. On the night of June 5, 1944, before a single American paratrooper hit the fields of Normandy, an argument was already brewing inside the aircraft. Men of the 101st Airborne Division were boarding C-47s for Mission Albany. Paratrooper Chris Canaris remembered the troop carrier pilots getting angry at the load. Not in some abstract way. Angry at what they could see being shoved into the fuselage. M1919A4.30 caliber machine guns, ammunition boxes, radios, demolitions, rations, and men packed into one vibrating aluminum tube. The later myth is neat. Airborne troops jumped light, moved fast, and carried compact weapons. That is not what went into those planes. What went in was a belt-fed machine gun, plus everything needed to keep it firing. Start with the mechanism, because the mechanism explains the burden. The M1919A4 was a recoil-operated Browning chambered in .30-06. You fed it from a fabric belt, closed the cover, charged it, and fired from a closed bolt in ground use. Each shot drove the action through its cycle, extracting, ejecting, feeding, locking, then firing again. At full speed, it could run at roughly 450 rounds per minute. That number sounds impressive, but it does not explain why paratroopers carried it. The useful number is 60. About 60 rounds per minute was the normal sustained rate for 30 minutes with the heavy air-cooled barrel. Not a dramatic burst, a steady beat of pressure. The gun existed to keep heads down long enough for everyone else to move. The M1919A4 was never really a one-man weapon, whatever a photograph might suggest. One man could carry the receiver and gun if he had to. Another took the M2 tripod. And cans went with whoever still had room on his body, or whoever happened to be standing nearby when the load got divided. In airborne practice, even riflemen outside the official team could carry extra .30-06 belts to hand off after landing. When a C-47 pilot looked back and saw extra weight, he was not looking at one gun. He was looking at a firing system spread across several men. Now the dry part. The numbers strip the myth clean. Gun and tripod together, about 48 pounds. Heavy enough to matter. Still far lighter than the old water-cooled M1917A1 system, which pushed past 100 pounds as a gun setup. This was not light. It was the kind of heavy that could still move with airborne troops. A standard 1940 ground belt held 150 rounds in woven fabric. An M1 ammunition chest held two 150-round belts, 300 rounds total. Later descriptions often mention 250-round belts, and those absolutely appear in discussions of the M1919A4. But the manual evidence for the ground gun points first to cloth belts and chests, not to the clean cinematic image most people picture. That image matters. One of the easiest mistakes is to imagine airborne gunners dropping into Normandy with aircraft-style metallic link belts hanging everywhere. The manual is blunt. Ball and tracer ammunition in metallic link belts was special Air Corps packing, not for use in the ground M1919A4. So if you want the likely D-Day picture, think cloth belts, think ammunition cans, think awkward weight with corners, not sleek linked belts draped for effect. The next piece is organizational. In February 1944, the logic of the parachute rifle squad had already changed. Airborne squad was being built around the M1919A4 instead of the BAR, with one spare M1919A4 authorized per squad. That is a huge tell. The squad accepted less portability in exchange for more sustained firepower, not because planners loved burden for its own sake, but because a scattered drop demanded a portable base of fire more than elegance. Men could be lost. Bundles could be lost. A squad could come down in hedgerows cut by sunken lanes and machine gun arcs. In that ground, the weapon that mattered was the one that could pin a position hard enough for the rest of the squad to work around it. The old myth treats this gun as an awkward extra. The evidence shows it becoming the center of the squad. Then Normandy tested the paperwork. Near Coquigny on June 9, 1944, Private Joe Gandara of D Company, 507th Parachute Infantry Regiment, 82nd Airborne Division moved forward under fire with an M1919A4. He advanced alone, firing the Browning from a carrying position. Before he was killed, he knocked out 3 German machine guns. 3. Not with a rifle, not with a lucky grenade. With the load men had argued about stuffing into the aircraft 4 nights earlier. Picture the movement. He is not prone behind a neat emplacement. He is on his feet. The gun bucks in his hands. Ammunition burns away by the belt. Every burst has to buy space. Every second in the open gives someone else another chance to line him up. But the M1919A4 could throw enough .30-06 fast enough and steadily enough to break enemy guns before they broke everyone else. That is not theory, it is performance. There is still a murky part. Exact D-Day belt and can load for a specific M1919A14 is hard to pin down. The field manual gives you 150-round fabric belts and 300 rounds in an M1 chest. Later summaries often cite 250-round belts. Both figures exist around this gun. Unless you have a Normandy packing list, a jump manifest, or a company-level SOP for that exact unit, the exact load in each aircraft stays uncertain. The broad truth does not. This was not a belt-fed luxury dragged along by inertia. It was not dead weight forced on airborne troops by planners who misunderstood parachute war. It was a deliberate trade. More pounds in the airplane meant more firepower on the ground. More awkwardness at the door meant more control of a hedgerow, a lane, a causeway. The M1919A4 replaced the BAR in airborne rifle squads for a reason. When a drop went wrong, sustained fire fixed things that speed alone could not. There is also a quieter detail inside all this. The weapon that looked least suited to a parachute assault was often the thing that made scattered men feel like a unit again. A receiver here, a tripod somewhere else, belts carried by riflemen, ammunition passed hand to hand after landing. The gun came down in pieces across the dark and only became itself when enough survivors found each other. So the case file closes in a strange place. The M1919A4 was heavy. The pilots were right to hate the load. The jumpers were right to demand it anyway. In Normandy, this machine gun kept proving its value in the least orderly moments, when men were scattered and plans were broken. In the aircraft, it was cargo. Hedgerows, it turned into a low metal pulse somewhere ahead, telling every man nearby where the fight had decided to stay. Number 2. M1A1 Bazooka. On June 6, 2025 in Normandy, Marcus Heim was finally recognized with the Distinguished Service Cross for what happened 81 years earlier at La Fière. 81 years passed before the Army returned to one small anti-tank fight in its paperwork. The citation reached back to the afternoon of June 6, 1944, a bridge west of Sainte-Mère-Église, a road so narrow that armor could only come straight at the men waiting for it. Start with the tube, 54.5 inches long, 13.26 pounds empty, 2.36 inches across. The rocket weighed 3.5 pounds. It measured 21.6 inches. It left the launcher at about 265 feet per second. Aimed fire reached 300 yards. Maximum range was 700. In a manual, those figures are easy to skim. At La Fière, they defined the fight. A 5-foot launcher on a flooded causeway, a rocket that had to be carried forward by hand. A target lane with almost no width because water and marsh boxed the road in on both sides. That road mattered because the 82nd Airborne had landed scattered. More than 13,000 Allied paratroopers crossed the channel in roughly 925 C-47s during the airborne assault. By daylight, scattered drops had turned into improvised strongpoints, and improvised strongpoints needed more than rifles. At La Fière, the 1st Battalion, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment gathered around the bridge and tried to hold the Mortar crossing against German counterattack. The roadblock was crude and exact at the same time. A disabled truck, surface-laid mines, 2 bazooka teams near the bridge, and a 57mm anti-tank gun farther back on higher ground. No depth, no room to maneuver, a line of tools placed where they had to work. The bazooka was a strange tool for that line. It looked simple. It was not. The M1A1 did not fire by percussion. It fired electrically. Dry cell batteries in the launcher, wires, contacts, a circuit that had to stay alive in conditions almost designed to kill circuits. Wet ground, mud, stress, handling under fire, a dead battery, a loose wire, or bad contact could turn 13.26 pounds of launcher into a hollow tube at exactly the wrong second. Picture a bazooka team at Lafayette. Two men aiming not just a weapon, but a small electrical system in a wet battlefield. Now the rocket. The authorized combat rounds were the M6A1 and M6A3 high-explosive anti-tank rockets, not the older M6 or M7 rounds made for the earlier M1 launcher. The manual is dry about this, and dry manuals usually mean some unit learned the rule the hard way. The key detail came after impact. This was a shaped charge. Its armor effect did not depend on high impact velocity the way a conventional armor-piercing shell did. It did not need brute speed to punch through. If the fuse worked, the explosive head did the work. That matters because 265 feet per second is slow in anti-tank combat, but a shaped charge changes the problem. The rocket only had to arrive. The weak point was everything that could fail before the warhead functioned properly. At Lafayette, plenty failed before anything worked. German armor and infantry came down the causeway. The paratroopers had almost no lateral space. Marsh on one side, water on the other, mines in front, men pinned to a ribbon of road. Standing there, you do not get to miss and calmly reset. Have a launcher just over 4.5 feet long, a rocket a little under 2 feet long, and tanks moving toward a bridge that cannot be given up, because the crossing behind you is the whole problem. The numbers narrowed even further. 2 bazooka teams, 1 57mm gun. 4 German tanks destroyed in the Army staff ride account. Other accounts split the tally differently. 3 by bazooka teams and a 4th stopped by some mix of gunfire, mines, grenades, or deterrence. The exact count blurs. The road does not. However the kills are assigned, the anti-tank fight compressed into a handful of launchers, a single gun, and men carrying ammunition forward on foot while machine gun and tank fire swept the causeway. Here, the names enter. Major Frederick Kellum and Captain Dale Royston tried to bring anti-tank ammunition across under fire. Both were killed. That detail changes the weapon in your head. The bazooka was also a supply problem, measured in 3.5-pound rockets, each one useful only if it reached the firing point before the tanks did. A tube without rockets was dead weight. Rockets without a working launcher were scrap. Kellum and Royston carried that arithmetic into the open, under fire, and died there. Then came the moment the files keep circling back to. The D-Day Overlord account says Marcus Heim recovered rockets from a fallen bazooka team, found Gordon Prine, and the 2 of them knocked out a tank. Not by accident, not with a miracle shot from nowhere. They restored the chain the battle had broken. Launcher, rocket, 2 men, 1 target lane, 1 firing chance. The armored thrust stalled there long enough for the defense to hold. Part often disappears behind the more famous airborne images. The weapon was not glamorous in use. A bazooka team advertised itself. The backblast was obvious. The reload cycle was slow compared with rifle fire. The tube was awkward in close terrain. The 300-yard aimed fire figure sounds generous until you add hedgerows, smoke, incoming fire, and the need to hit armor where a shaped charge could matter. But on a causeway, with the enemy forced into a line, those limits became advantages. The road solved much of the aiming problem for the men trying to stop the tanks. Lafayette keeps returning in discussions of airborne weapons for that reason, not because the bazooka was perfect, almost the reverse. Electrical ignition that could fail, ammunition that had to be hand-carried into a kill zone, a launcher long enough to be awkward and light enough to feel fragile. Yet on one of the tightest pieces of ground on D-Day, those 2.36 inches of tube became a gate. Mines, gunfire, rockets, and men overlapped in mud and confusion. Later, the paperwork could not cleanly separate one from the other. The bridge remained contested, but the German attack broke. The records never fully agreed on whether the bazookas destroyed 3 tanks or helped stop 4. They did agree on the result. A 5-foot launcher, fed one 3.5-pound rocket at a time, held the road long enough to change the battle. 2 officers died carrying the ammunition. Number 1. M2 60mm mortar. The little gun you could lose in the dark and still carry all night. On the night of June 5th to 6th, 1944, a U.S. parachute rifle platoon jumped into Normandy with its own artillery. Not at company headquarters, not somewhere to the rear. Right there with the platoon, one M2 60mm mortar, its crew, and its ammunition scattered across human bodies. In the February 1944 parachute platoon organization used for D-Day, the tube was supposed to land with the same men who would need it first. The crew carried the weapon and ready rounds, the rest of the burden spread outward. 7 riflemen in one squad, 7 in the other, 14 men total. Each added one 60mm bomb to his load. That meant at least 14 rounds moving through the night before you even counted what the mortar squad carried or what might come down in bundles. Each of those rounds was real weight. A 60mm shell weighed roughly 3 to 5 pounds depending on type. Picture the jump as it happened. Rifle, ammunition, grenades, water, entrenching tool, reserve rations, maybe extra machine gun belts, maybe demolition. Then one more thing, because somebody had to carry the platoon's fire support on his body. If the men reached the rally point, and the bombs reached it too, but the mortar did not, every one of those rounds turned into useless weight at the exact moment weight mattered most. That gamble sat inside the design. The M2 was brilliant only if the pieces found each other. Start with the arithmetic. 1 mortar per parachute rifle platoon. 2 rifle squads in the D-Day organization, not the later expanded structure. It was a formation that was light, aggressive, and fragile. The later December 1944 tables showed a 6-man 60mm mortar squad. Squad leader, gunner, assistant gunner, 3 ammunition bearers, because the Army understood what this weapon demanded. Tube, baseplate, sight. Bombs. Men to haul them, men to keep them together. Over Normandy, the platoon was organized around dispersion before it was organized around security. It had to be. Airborne troops were supposed to arrive by violence and confusion. The mortar fit that system. It was also trapped by it. Now bring it down to ground level. You hit in darkness. Wind shoves the canopy. Hedgerows break units into fragments. Marshes swallow equipment. Bundles disappear. Officers land in the wrong fields. NCOs never arrive. One man has a shell in his gear and no idea where the gunner is. Another has the base plate and no assistant gunner. Another has the tube and 2 bombs. This is not a platoon in any normal sense. It is parts of one. That matters because the M2 was not like a rifle or a Thompson or even a bazooka. Those could still function inside pieces of a battle. A mortar could not. Distributed, it was powerful when assembled and merciless when broken apart. You can see the break in Ronald Spear's 2nd Platoon, Company D, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment, before the fighting around Garand on June 11th to 13th. After the D-Day jump, that platoon had lost 58% of its men. Not casualties as a statistic. Men gone. Most of its leadership gone. Its 60mm mortar gone. A rifleman could still be carrying a mortar bomb weighing 3, 4, maybe 5 pounds. He had done exactly what the organization demanded. He brought part of the platoon's firepower with him, but without the tube, without the crew, without the complete weapon, that bomb was no longer fire support. It was dead weight in a half-destroyed platoon moving toward contact. That is what made the M2 such a perfect airborne weapon and such a cruel one. When it worked, it gave a platoon something close to pocket artillery. The standard high-explosive round, the M49A2, could throw blast and fragments onto a target the rifle line could not see directly. Other ammunition existed too: white phosphorus smoke, illuminating rounds, training types back in safer places. This was not one tube lobbing one kind of shell. It bent terrain. It dropped HE behind a hedge. It smoked a lane. It lit darkness. It hit men who thought a ditch or orchard had hidden them. In the close, compartmentalized country of Normandy, that mattered. But first came reunion. The mortar squad had to survive the drop. The weapon had to survive the drop. The ammunition had to survive the drop. Then, all of it had to reconnect, often under fire, with a platoon already fighting as fragments. That was the price of giving paratroopers artillery in miniature. Not recoil, not complexity. Separation. The weakness was the gap between the shell and the tube. So when people picture D-Day paratroopers, they usually imagine a cleaner loadout than the men actually carried. Rifle in the hands, maybe a gammon grenade, maybe a folding stock carbine, maybe a bazooka team somewhere nearby. The mortar changes that picture. Now the whole platoon becomes an ammunition train. 14 riflemen can mean 14 extra bombs before you count the mortar crew at all. 14 extra chances to put HE or smoke where a rifle cannot reach. The M2 was not just one more weapon in the platoon, it was a promise the platoon made to itself. If enough of us find each other after the jump, we will still be able to hit like something larger. If they did not, the promise flipped. The shells stayed. The effect vanished. This points back to the larger pattern underneath all of it. The weapons that worked best often sat close to a line armies later tried to regulate, deny, or quietly bury. Not because they failed, but because they solved too much once they were in place. A 60mm mortar did not look sinister. It looked efficient, portable, technical, almost modest. Put it in the right hands, and a platoon could reach over cover, into orchards, behind walls, down lanes, into the places men hide when rifles start cracking. The M2 turned vertical fire into something infantry could carry through the sky. On D-Day, though, its first enemy was not German armor or machine guns. It was the drop itself. That is why this tiny mortar sits at the top, not because it was the heaviest hitter, because it exposed the whole airborne gamble better than anything else. The men were scattered on purpose, but their firepower existed only if that scattered force could reassemble faster than the enemy could react. Lose a rifleman, and you lose one gun. Lose a bazooka round, and you lose one shot. Lose the mortar, and a dozen men may still be carrying artillery they can never fire. The M2 was a system built out of separated human beings in the dark. After the D-Day jump, the platoon had lost 58% of its men, most leadership, and its 60mm mortar.